A common thing around the crypto space is comparing projects, trying to figure out which one is better than the other one. And I feel like more recently, this started to kind of phase out, which is good to see because we now know that this is going to be a multi chain initiative. It's not just going to be one project to rule all. It's not just going to be one project, grasping all of the money in the world and tokenizing it. No, it's going to be a joint operation. Utility-based projects like, for an example, HBAR and XRP and Algo and XLM and, so many other great ones, they're all going to work together and they're all going to bring about one of the largest revolutions to money, to, the system itself. We're not just talking about finance, we're talking about the way everything moves. And this is how we get there, right? By working with one another. If we go back in time, though, two projects, HBAR and XRP, were compared to each other quite heavily, especially back in 2021. A lot of people were asking, is XRP better than HBAR or is HBAR better than XRP? Which one of these are, which one should I pick, basically? Now I have always been very vocal about holding as many of these utility-based projects as you can. Obviously, yes, we could be too diversified, so we need to make strategic picks. But when it comes to HBAR and XRP, I've always stated that these two are going to be very successful, no matter what. It's not a game of, all right, XRP is going to be the HBAR killer or HBAR is going to be the XRP killer. Even now, I still see a few comments on X where people are saying, XRP is going to blow it, HBAR out of the water. There's no way that HBAR is going to even keep up. But I feel like a lot of these people are just simply not paying attention to the facts. Now, I'm bringing this back up because, yes, HBAR and XRP are going to be working together. If we go over here, big shout out to Exponential Science and also Generation Infinity, because the original post was from Generation Infinity. Exponential Science did put a spotlight on it, saying our research is making waves. Genfinity IO covered our recent paper, and this is on how DREC and shared custody models are shaping the future of institutional crypto management. The paper is notable because it introduces a shared custodial wallet architecture that leverages multi-party computation, threshold signature scheme for secure multi-entity key management, confirms Ripple custody support for Hedera for the first time in academic literature, integrates DREC for decentralized seedless recovery, outlines how multi-party computation and compliance features can streamline cross-chain asset control across Ethereum, XRP Ledger, and even Hedera. Now, this got posted on June 6th, but the original view of this, which did, by the way, include, of course, the paper by Exponential Science, was posted on May 7th. And we have breaking academic paper confirms Ripple custody integration with Hedera, unlocking institutional grade XRP plus HBAR wallet via shared MPC custody, co-authored by joint ecosystem leaders with ties to the DREC Alliance. Ripple custody also confirmed Solana, ADA, Ethereum, XLM, and also Bitcoin. But what's crazy about this is, yes, Ripple custody. We need to focus on that. I'm going to put a spotlight on this here in a bit. But let's actually talk a little bit more about some of these connections, right? We know that Ripple and Hedera have been closely collaborating. Now, I know that Ripple isn't XRP and XRP isn't Ripple, but we do know that the system here that Ripple is, running essentially, has a deep connection with XRP and the XRPL. Even Ripple custody now has support for XRP as well. Ripple payments, and let's just go back to the original idea of RippleNet, right? XRP being the bridge currency for cross-border payments. That's still a common theme even today because we are now starting to see stablecoins, for an example, launching around the world. Stablecoins or anything of value that's being tokenized, all these things still need that neutral bridge currency, which XRP could definitely be that. But I do think that there's going to be multiple bridge currencies. Basically, whichever one is the most liquid will probably be utilized heavily. But I do think that there's going to be multiple winners in that space as well. But when we think about this and we actually go over here to some of the connections between Ripple and XRP and even Hedera, We go back to May 9th, for an example, of 2024. So going back a whole year ago, Ripple and XRP Ledger Labs joined Hedera and Algorand ecosystems as founding members of the DREC Alliance. So just like we are seeing over here, right? Like they're talking about the DREC Alliance. And this is definitely a huge piece for like mass adoption. I do think that what the DREC Alliance is doing is so crucial for mass adoption. So definitely focus on the players tied to this. Obviously, Ripple and Hedera are tied to this, along with a few other players like, for an example, Casper, Constellation, and of course a few other ones. But this is definitely a big deal because this was more confirmation that, you know, Ripple and Hedera are making sure that they are working together to make sure that this space is as successful as, you know, possible. Now, the original idea of Ripple and Hedera actually working together, and we have to give credit where credit is due. A good friend of mine, Max Walker Williams, actually interviewed Brad Garlinghouse as well as Lehman Baird, and this goes back to January of 2024. And we have, of course, XRP Army, H Barbarian, Stop What You're Doing. I've just had the honor of interviewing two great men you may know from Ripple and Hedera. We are stronger together, says crypto legends Lehman Baird and Brad Garlinghouse. And by the way, in this interview, they did say that maybe we could work together on something special. And then, of course, you know, just months down the road, we got the DREC Alliance. So definitely interesting. It seems as though Ripple and Hedera have been working together for quite some time. And even more recent, January 18th of this year, Mance Harmon did meet Brad Garlinghouse, and we have it's time for US-based platforms to lead the industry. And yeah, this is definitely a big one to focus on. But outside of this, we have driving MiCA compliance and blockchain sustainability. Remember, the MiCA Alliance is, of course, founded by Hedera, Ripple, and Aptos. When we think about, you know, this whole idea of, you know, competition, I don't think that we need to look at ourselves as competition. I don't think that Hedera is competing with Ripple. I don't think that, you know, Hedera is competing with Stellar. I don't think that there's this big push on, all right, how can we kill this other network? How can we absolutely beat them, you know, to doing this or doing that? I think that as we really look at the total addressable market for everything that's happening with crypto tech, you got to remember that it's so much bigger than what we actually think. It's not valued in just the single $1 trillion region. No, it's in the hundreds of trillions. The total addressable market, from what we heard from Archix's CEO, was $1.7 quadrillion in terms of tokenization. That does not include, you know, new markets arising, 24/7, you know, trading activity. Like when we think about how big this is, it's much bigger than just, oh, yeah, which one of these are going to be the most successful? Which one is going to kill the other one? This is not a game of competition. This is a game of, all right, how can these projects work together to make sure that this actually happens? And that's exactly what's happening with, like, for example, the DREC Alliance, the MiCA, you know, Crypto Alliance. All of these alliances are so crucial. But let's actually go back to that original post, because I do want to put a real big spotlight actually and a focus on Ripple Custody, because Ripple Custody is a very interesting solution, because this is all based around institutional crypto and digital asset, you know, solutions. Access the entire digital asset ecosystem today. Just this statement alone tells us that no, this is not going to be gate kept. We're not just going to see institutions tie into XRP and the XRPL. We are going to see the entire digital asset ecosystem, you know, become accessible through this. Now we have scale new revenue streams and deepen customer retention with secure crypto custody solutions. What are those solutions? Well, for an example, tokenization, digital asset management, stablecoin issuance, and beyond. This could scale to payments. It could be DeFi. It could be anything. And we have down here, you know, the facts behind this. But again, when we think about the players that will be tied into this, you look at banks, you look at fintechs, you look at crypto businesses. This is where we start to see some major adoption of some of these underlying networks that are tied into Ripple Custody. Now, I don't think that I need to tell you guys, but just in case, Ripple Custody was originally Medico, in which Ripple did acquire. Now, why is that important? Well, because again, if we go back over here, right, got to remember that this integration with Ripple Custody allows for HBAR and even XRP to have, you know, this major exposure to institutional players, especially those that were tied into Medico before the acquisition because they just, went over to Ripple custody. We know that this is true because of DZ Bank, for example. But when we think about those institutional players that were tied to Medico alone, they're some of the biggest names out there. Just to name 4 right off the bat, we have BNP Paribas, which is a massive giant, right? They joined Medico back in July of 2022. They still are tied back to Ripple custody. You got to remember that this is a massive, massive bank. In fact, they are one of the largest banks, especially over in Europe, outside of BNP Paribas. Union Bank of the Philippines, they actually selected Medico and IBM back in January of 2022 as well. And this was around digital asset custody operations. This also proves to you guys that banks were here, for a while. 2022, this is 2022 as well. BBVA, back in December of 2023, they partnered up with Medico. We know that they are still working with Ripple even today. Outside of BBVA, of course, DZ Bank, the one that I mentioned. This is Germany's second largest bank. Partnered up with Medico for digital asset custody. This was back in February of 2023. Also, HSBC is there, Citi's there. There is a massive amount of institutional players tied to, Ripple through just the Medico acquisition. But on top of acquisitions, right, we got to think about Hidden Road, right? Because Hidden Road was recently acquired, and Hidden Road was immediately plug and played into the Ripple custody platform. Now, when we are thinking about that, okay, well, I just went over a few connections. What about another 300 top institutional customers that Hidden Road had behind it? All of a sudden, you can see how big this is for any network tied into Ripple custody or even Ripple's ecosystem. So the fact that we have confirmation of Hedera and also even XRP, I think that that's a no-brainer. It goes to show you how big this could be for both of them. Institutional grade adoption of digital assets is starting to heat up in a big way, and having a name like Ripple, who has been 10 steps ahead of everyone around this space, is crucial to focus on. Ripple is becoming extremely successful, and those networks that are tied to Ripple, and in this case, when we think about, Ripple custody, it seems as though, most of the space will be connected to it. Right now, the confirmation that we do have is Solana, ADA, Ethereum, XLM, Bitcoin, XRP, and also HBAR. So again, very exciting stuff. But outside of this, also think about some of the connections to the same, players that Ripple and Hedera have. For example, Aberdeen is one big one, right? Go back to June of 2023. I actually think that it was announced back in even 2022. Aberdeen tokenizes money market fund on Hedera with Archix. And then, of course, Ripple collaborates with Archix to bring hundreds of millions of dollars of tokenized real-world assets to the XRP ledger. This was back in June of 2024. So again, you can kind of see this this major ecosystem rising around tokenization, around payments, things like that. And it's all connected back to a few players, like Archix, for an example. And what this really reminds me of, if we're really thinking about this, because this is the new financial system, this is the new system that we are witnessing being created in front of us. It reminds me back to the Finternet, the financial system for the future that the BIS did outline back in April of 2024. When we think about this, we actually scroll down, and the first thing that we are actually reading is we propose the concept of the Finternet as a vision for the future financial system. Multiple financial ecosystems interconnected with each other. Right off the bat, right there you go. You have multiple financial ecosystems interconnected with each other, much like the internet. So now we have a, multi-network, multi-chain as well, future becoming, a reality. And this is all connected through unified ledgers. Okay. And this is where we start to see, tokenization being tapped in, transactions moving, much faster than we ever thought possible. We're seeing 24/7, 365 trading of every single asset class, every single, market as well. This is how we get into that new financial system, or I would argue it's a completely new system that everything is running on, because this is going to be DLT rails, automated DLT rails as well. This is going to change everything. And when we think about this, Hedera and Ripple are doing this together. HBAR and XRP are obviously going to be very successful because of this. And this is why I've always stated that this whole competition argument about, which one is better, which one, should I look into right now, and, which one is going to be, the killer of the other one. I think all of those conversations, all of those questions, and of course I understand where a lot of people are coming from because they're not in this space all the time, but I do think that a lot of those questions and a lot of those statements are just, misunderstanding on where we're headed and the connections that some of these networks actually have to one another. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, leave a like, subscribe, notifications on because I'm more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord in the description below. And with that being said, guys, it's been Nick. Thanks for watching. Peace out.